Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Greetings of the day, friends. Coming to lecture series 2, we were discussing the classification of the countries based on developed, developing and less developed countries. So here I would summarize it like this: characterizing their status from the WTO perspective. The nations ahead in the use of technology, not only in the use but also those who can produce technology and able to sell technology in the market are termed as developed countries. Nations depending upon rural economy are termed less developed countries, while those in between are termed as developing countries. Economic rationality and trade between nations. Now comes how we can rationalize, or what can be the reasoning to justify that there must be trade across the nations. This reasoning and this classification and also in-depth analysis is required because we have categorized the nations as developed, developing and less developed. Therefore, a question always comes into the mind that how can a less developed country be benefited by a trade with a developed country? It may be, it takes again to the same colonial relationship, or how a developing country can be better off getting itself involved in this global trade environment. There has to be certain reasonable justification for it. So there are both economic justifications as well as the legal justifications for it. Underlying economic rationality suggests the link between productivity, efficiency and wealth maximization. So if we go by the economic reasoning that creates a link or that establishes the link that how the productivity can be increased or how the productivity can be boosted, that is, if there is a healthy competition between the nations across the globe, they definitely will try to outperform each other and in a healthy manner. That means they will produce more. And as an outcome of this better production, the consumers will be benefited as they will be getting products at a lesser cost, and also that will be available readily. Efficiency. Efficiency is that they will get good quality product in a lesser time and in lesser cost. So efficiency is a very virtuous thing that gets generated out of this global competition through international trade. Wealth maximization. Nations will be benefited if they export more of the goods that they are producing or they are exporting. Mainly the goods that is worth quality and that is appreciated by the consumers from different nations. So that kind of wealth maximization. Now this will also enrich their technological advancement, because consumer nowadays will not simply buy a product if it is manufactured in a developed country or if it is manufactured by United States or by Germany or Japan, until unless it has certain quality or certain output as well, or it is benefiting the consumer in a very distinct manner. So that will lead to a kind of prosperity, not only prosperity but also trade enhancement. We can connect it with the wealth maximization. Now this wealth maximization should be differentiated by the wealth that is created simply by selling the raw materials, simply by selling the petrol or any such natural resources, and then the wealth that is generated by the technological outcome or by enhancement of the technology. Productivity improvement can make a nation richer on a per capita basis. So this will, if we do this in a very systematic manner, that means nation categorizes where are the potential factors that can help in its export promotion or help in maximum production of the goods for export. For example, if the nation has good raw materials, iron ore, and also skilled engineers who can manufacture goods out of that iron ore, so they should concentrate on making the goods from that line of the products and also the raw material. If a nation has a better coastline, then those export promotion zones should be created across the coastal line. That means that will be saving their labor cost, saving their transportation cost while exporting the goods. So things has to be rationalized in a manner that how in best manner they can generate the income on a per capita basis. If a nation is trying to create an export promotion zone that is far off from the coastal area, maybe in some hill town or maybe in some desert area, that will be very inefficient. I mean to say here, they will have to bear a lot of cost for taking their goods from one place to the coastline or for the export of that good. If a country does not have an ore, as I was quoting here the example of an iron ore, they may have to import an iron ore at a very expensive price and then manufacturing good out of that iron ore and again reselling it to some other country at a even very higher cost. So that will be very tedious thing or not very viable thing, which can be advised in terms of the WTO trade measures. It is not how much capital a country has that makes it rich, but rather it is how productive that capital, and according to him the key to productivity is technology. Now the new concept, that is to promote the technological advancement, and then that technological advancement leads to the gains in trade. That kind of relationship or connection that is created makes the capital of the country even more enhancing, or it gives more worth to that kind of capital. So the policymakers need to think on that line, that how it is not simply the capital that is created, but how that capital is created and where that will be further invested, in which direction that can lead to further enhancement of the technological outcome. Example is the US and the other Western countries are not rich because of their natural resources or because of the capital gain from somewhere, but because of the continuous improvement in the technological sector, as stated to you earlier. Then comes history and development of present world trade law. So what we see today in terms of the WTO is not very recent creation. It has its own history. It started with the formation of the GATT, and prior to GATT, the nations, when the Second World War was going on, they were discussing that how they can bring a fundamental change in the economic concept, how they can bring the change in the world order. So that was somewhat during the year 1941. The Atlantic Charter, basically they emphasized on such practices that can be initiated where the nations are not simply confined to their own trade benefits, but they should come up with above those trade benefits and think on global equity, so or the equitable value that can be created on a global basis. So they made the resolve. It was basically, this started in United States, and also the Britain participated as a major partner, because Britain was also during the Second World War was thinking liberation of the colonies, and liberation of the colonies was only one political outcome, but they also wanted the trade relation with those colonies, they should be maintained but in different format. So they initiated this Atlantic Charter, which was a statement issued on 14th August that set out British and American goals for the world after the World War II. So firstly, they talked about institutes like International Monetary Fund, then International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. That means after Second World War, those countries who are severely devastated, they will be reconstructed, and for the reconstruction, the money will be supported by those institutions, and later on, after they have industrialized themselves, or they have set these global targets of development, then they can participate in international trade. And this time it was free for all the countries, irrespective of their previous status as colonies or as victors or as losers. So that was not the primacy, rather an open opportunity was called for all the nations. Although the leading nations, that were Britain and the United States, who were playing the lead role in establishing these institutions and these agreements. So primarily they focused on non-discrimination access to goods and raw materials. As discussed with you in the previous lecture, that for the nations to allow free movement of goods, there must be no discrimination between the foreign good and the good belonging to the same very country, the like good belonging to the same very country. For example, if country A is manufacturing cars and it is also allowing the import of car from various countries, so they should not create any legal restriction or any discriminatory practice, either in the form of putting special taxes or special duties on the goods that are imported from the other countries, or then even categorizing the goods that are imported from some countries and selecting the goods that are imported from another group of countries. So that practice of discrimination has to be abolished. That was the key fundamental adopted by the members of the WTO and the GATT as well. International cooperation in the interest of labor standards, social security and economic progress in the post-war order. Now, realizing the fact that we cannot achieve these objectives without international cooperation. Like earlier, it was to maintain the superiority, to establish the economic superiority. That was the prime goal of those nations. But after Second World War, or during the time of the Second World War, they realized that these targets cannot be achieved without international cooperation, and that again there was a wide debate about the human rights. Now this human rights was not only confined to the basic fundamental rights, but the rights of the labor class also, because the labor class was badly exploited during the industrial ages, or when the Europe has gone through its different phases of industrialization. So the interest of labor standards, social security is that there must be state support in case there is a slump in the market, or in case the industry is facing any kind of depression, or during sickness, during any such catastrophe or any such risk factor that society is going through, or any negative aspect the society has to face. There has to be support from the state side in the form of social security that can help the nation to be more democratic, that can help the nation to think about the progress of its citizens, not the nation to create its supremacy. So a distinction in the concept was drawn. Earlier, the concepts were more focused how a nation can attain its supremacy at the cost of the exploitation of their citizens, either through the labor exploitation or without providing them any social security. But now, after Second World War, the focus was how best a state can do for its people. That can be maintaining the labor standards, maintaining the social security setup, and the economic progress in the post-World War order. So there has to be generation of employment, the industry should work, the state should be accountable to its people, not that the people should be accountable to the state and they should give up everything for the state, but now it was vice versa, state's accountability towards its people. The nations will endeavor with due respect for their existing obligation to further the enjoyment by all states, great or small, victor or vanquished, of access on equal terms to the trade and to the raw materials of world which are needed for their economic prosperity. The next target or the next aim that was suggested that the nations will endeavor, that they will try their best, or they will put all their effort with due respect for their existing obligations, the obligations that are created by these treaties, to further the enjoyment by all the states. Now, earlier there was no such concept, economic concept either, of enjoyment by all states, because the concept was how far one nation can gain from the trade without realizing the fact whether the other state is exploited, without bothering for whether the citizens of the other nation, they are deprived of the basic advantages. So that kind of things were now kept aside, and the idea that was included, enjoyment by all state, great or small, victor or vanquished, without pointing out that these states, they led to the war, that led to the colonialization, all that negative aspect has to be kept aside, of assess on equal terms, and they all should be treated equally to the trade and to raw materials of the world which are needed for their economic prosperity, and they will have their share, their valuable share to the raw materials of the world, because the idea was these resources of the world, they should be not states' property, but there should be equitable right of the citizens of that country. For example, if iron ore or petroleum is available in a particular country in abundance, then state should not control that iron ore or the petroleum. Rather, the citizens of that country, they have equal rights to the profit that is earned by selling those natural resources. So the idea was the individual or the citizens, they should be benefited from the wealth of the nations and wealth of the world. After the organization of International Monetary Fund, monetary and finance system with International Monetary Fund and International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, this process aimed at new structures for international trade and International Trade Organization as an institutional platform for international trade. Now, seemingly these ideas, they created a new hope, but that was all in theory. We cannot expect the country that got vanquished or that was badly devastated by the consequences of war will be considered equal in terms of the trade, or will be given equal opportunity in terms of the trade. The industries that were totally abundant, or the laborers, those who were badly exploited, they will be given the better wages immediately after the war. That was just a fancy idea. So the special institutions were established who will work upon how the states will frame the policies for all kind of nations, realizing their economic potential, realizing the consequences of the war, also supporting them how they will be able to adopt the new economic concepts by giving them the funds at a lesser interest rate, by supporting their own development measures, by establishing their own units for reconstruction and development. All these responsibilities were taken by International Monetary Fund and International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, aimed at new structures for international trade and International Trade Organization as an institutional platform for international trade, and therefore altogether will work that how international trade will be for the benefit of all. So the idea was a new format was created after the Second World War by establishing different form of institutions. Different roles were given to different form of institutions, realizing the challenges, but they all will work with one goal. That is, there will be focus on international trade, and simply not focusing on international trade, but by means of adopting international trade measures, many kind of challenges or objectives will be achieved and challenges will be resolved. For example, if there is unemployment, then industrialization of those countries will help to curb that unemployment. If there is lack of prosperity, then by increase in the export from that country, the prosperity will be given an opportunity. So the new concepts were formatted to be adopted by the different group of countries depending upon the kind of objectives they have set according to the WTO or according to the GATT. The Havana Charter of 1948 encapsulated these structures in a comprehensive framework. The Havana Charter contained rules not only for all areas of trade but also for competition, development and labor market. However, the Charter proved to be overambitious in time and could not be functional. Now, one thing I should emphasize here, I have repeatedly or time and again I have said GATT and WTO, but I must clarify this thing, that when Second World War was going on, the idea was to create an institution like United Nations, as United Nations was created before the Second World War ended. So an idea was to create a trade organization also like the United Nations, and it was even initiated through Havana Charter and also through the Geneva Conference of the United Nations. It was termed as International Trade Organization, and alongside International Trade Organization, an agreement among a format of agreement among the member state which is termed as GATT was also being prepared. So there were two things simultaneously being prepared. One was the format for International Trade Organization and other was the details of the contract that is termed as General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs and Trade, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. These two were simultaneously being prepared. The ITO was, that is International Trade Organization, was expected to be of same stature as United Nations, but it failed. It could not even initiate it. It could not be initiated. Reason being, because the developing countries, they were emphasizing that the trade should be linked with the idea of development. That means, firstly, there should be a clear roadmap how the development is possible through the trade. And if that is not possible, then we cannot sign International Trade Organization. But GATT was simply a format of agreement where the member states, or let's say the contracting party is a better term when we talk about the GATT, not member states. Let me clarify this. Reason being, because GATT was basically a contractual document, not an institution like the WTO. So the contracting parties, they agreed on certain terms and conditions that they will fulfill after they have signed this agreement. So finally what happened, ITO could not succeed, neither it could function. So it was like an aborted child. But GATT, being of lower stature, simply an agreement accepted by the contracting parties, was functional at that very time. So it was basically the GATT that started, and after the GATT, the contracting parties realized that now they require an institution of larger scale, because GATT was not able to handle many kind of challenges. But the core idea of free trade that we see today, that was initiated in the GATT. So they were ready to accept the core ideas that were existing in the GATT, but they wanted more certainty, more reliability and a larger framework, a dispute settlement body that can have a consistent dispute settlement system where the nations can rely upon the decisions that are being given by those dispute settlement body. So that after that it led to its transformation into WTO. So WTO is nothing new, but it is a transformation of the GATT into a larger institution or an institutional framework. But the agreements that were existing, or the terms and conditions that were existing in the GATT order, they were by and large accepted in the WTO in a larger scale or in a better format. Until unless any such GATT provision that is inconsistent with the WTO, all the provisions or all the agreements that are part of the GATT agreement, they are accepted as it is in the WTO. Alright. So now I think it should be clear. Now coming to this Havana Charter thing, there were the discussions and debates that started at that very time, that how they can lead to this international institution, or what I said here, international trade organization. And at that very time they were also debating that if international trade organization do not come into existence, then we will have different alternative, that is GATT. But then simply by saying that we have started this free trade order will not help to achieve the target. So there has to be other aspects connected with that GATT agreement which must help to boost the trade in a better direction. So the Havana Charter contained rules not only for all areas of trade but also for competition. Now competition here doesn't mean the negative aspect of the competition that we want. If company A is, I explain here like this. Company A manufactures cloth, company B also manufactures cloth. So the competition here doesn't mean the company B would like to finish company A, okay, but it is that they will try to produce better. Then at a cheaper cost, okay, then readily available to the consumers. Or I put it like this, consumer satisfaction. So what we can say is the betterment of the consumer was the main objective. Development and labor market. Development means if we adopt a sluggish mentality, or if we are contented, then we simply cannot say that we are progressing or we are making contribution to the technology. For example, if today we have discovered electronic means to be applied for using electronic batteries to be applied, electrical batteries to be applied in motor vehicles, and we sit reluctantly without trying to figure out if there can be other better possibilities that can be adopted, then we are no more making contribution to the technology. Take the example like the guy who discovered steam engine. If he, or if the railway people, they would have never thought of inventing other alternatives like the diesel engine, the electric engine, then we would have simply relied upon the steam engine. And today when we are talking about so much of pollution, then we could not have solved this problem. So there has to be a constant aspiration, a constant desire through the manufacturing process, through the use of different technology to improve or to make contribution in the technological zone. Then labor market. Now labor market is something, earlier the concept of labor market was confining only to the country where the goods are manufactured. But now the labor market holds a very different concept. If a country can get a good quality labor at a cheaper price, then the manufacturing unit of that company can be shifted to that very country. Now that is the reason why many of the manufacturing units are established in China by different multinational companies, because there they realize the labor market is very efficient, very effective, and they can produce the goods at a cheaper cost in a more efficient manner. So the concept of labor market was changing. Earlier that was very much nationalistic. However, the charter proved to be over ambitious in time and could not be functional. Now since these ideas, they seemed very ideal, but they were like too early in terms of their time. So the politicians or the leaders of the world who have initiated these debates, they could foresee that the best possible things can be achieved by opening the trade, by allowing the labor market from different countries. But the people of those countries or the representative of the people were not ready to accept it. So the Atlantic Conference and later on the Havana Charter could not succeed in this regard. As a consequence of failure of Havana Charter, the provisional GATT became new framework for the world leaders. Now the failure of Atlantic and Havana Charter, what does this mean? That ITO could not be established. International Trade Organization could not be established. But as I stated to you, GATT was also in progress, simultaneously in progress. So the member states that were part of the formative ITO, they decided that let's start by a small step, and that small step means that the contracting parties of the GATT should start with free movement of goods by adopting most favored nation clause, by adopting national treatment clause. So they took a smaller step rather than taking a big leap forward. The GATT became new framework for the world leaders. The main reason for growing opposition in the US Congress, which was afraid that Havana Charter might establish too far-reaching restraints on the foreign trade policy of the United States. Second reason why ITO could not be established was, or there was a failure of this Havana Charter, the US was leading at that time because US was very instrumental in normalizing the situation of the Second World War, bringing peace and establishing the role of international institutions. So the US policymakers, they realized that they have a very great role to play. Not only that they have very great role to play, but they can dictate their terms, or if not dictate their terms, but at least they can be leaders in many respects of the world order, new world order. And if they allow an international trade organization to be created where there will be a concept of member states working on an equal basis, that means there will be a very reduced role of the American leaders, American parliamentarians, and that they were not ready to accept at that time. Although they were realizing that could be the ideal situation for the world, but they were not ready to accept it. So that was one very prominent reason for its failure. The GATT assumed some of the functions originally assigned to the ITO and became a sort of de facto organization. So consequently, GATT was accepted as it was a small step towards international trade order, new international trade order, and we can say this to liberalizing the trade mainly. Now there comes UK's role also. Why the UK's role cannot be discounted? Because UK was holding many of the colonies at that time, and it has signed its Commonwealth Agreement. UK wanted to retain that Commonwealth Agreement system. That is the special arrangement it has made, legally the special arrangement it has made with its former colonies, giving preference to the goods from those countries, and those countries also reciprocally giving the preference to the goods from UK. So that kind of approach it wanted to be maintained. But since GATT was a newly evolved system that was trying to discard these practices, GATT has not readily discarded these practices, earlier practices of bilateral treaties for the trade relation or the Commonwealth system. It has not outrightly discarded, but it was moving in that direction, that how it will be discarding this or asking the member states, the contracting parties to discard those. But UK being in a powerful position, mainly because of its earlier trade positioning with its former colonies, was not very happy with this kind of developments. So the UK's attitude was different. It sought tariff reduction, but also to maintain imperial preferences. Now the term at that time used by UK was imperial preference, because mainly the colonies were accepting the role of the queen or the monarch of the Britain. And the British people stated that these are the preferences being given to the colonies, and that should be maintained in the form as imperial preference being given. And US was also at some point of time its colony, but US since has totally discarded this concept. Therefore, there was some kind of difference of opinion emerging between US and UK on this point, whether imperial preferences should be allowed to maintain or not. UK's delegation favored the role of the government and insisted on allowing quotas for the reason maintaining balance of payment. Now, UK was thinking of its own advantage, because let's say if India was its former colonies, then maintaining that in new trade relationship with India, stating that we both have trade relationship earlier also, but now we will have it in a new format, but both the countries will be giving preference to each other good. That means India giving preference to the British good and British giving preference to the Indian goods. Now compare it with a situation where most favored nation clause is also signed, where India and Britain both are supposed to give preference, equal preference to good from all over the world, not simply Britain giving preference to the good from India. So the new order that was emerging, that has to be maintained in the form of obligation, that has to be fulfilled in the form of obligation, not that British ruling class or the British leadership thinking of its parochial interest should be maintained. Quotas allowed for balance of payment reason. Now that led to the emergence of new system, that is to maintain quotas, that okay, if you are not giving preference to the British goods, or British people not giving preference to the Indian goods, but at least fix some quotas, that we can have 10 quintals of wheat from Britain without imposing any tariff. Britain having 10 quintals of rice from India without imposing any tariff. But if same rice is imported in Britain from some other country, or if same good is imported by India from some other country other than Britain, then both will impose tariff. So that kind of thing was now a new development, that is the quota system, although that was a short-lived thing. Adam Smith propounded the concept of absolute advantage. So new economic thinkers, they were criticizing these kind of earlier economic concept, earlier approaches of the leaders, and they wanted the world should now accept that every individual should live in a system where it can develop and exploit its economic potential and skillful potential to its maximum. That means if any person belonging to India, belonging to Britain, it should live in such a system that if it has any kind of potential which is of entrepreneur nature, or it has any kind of skill that can be valued in terms of economic advantages, must have the maximum opportunity to know its potential, exploit its skill. And that is how that is possible if we open our markets. That means if someone who is very good in manufacturing any kind of good, let's say cotton clothes in India, can realize the maximum skills or maximum value of its skills if Indian market is open to the whole world, and he can sell his goods, his cotton produced goods throughout the world through India without any tariff, without any political hindrances. Likewise, if Britain is good in manufacturing any of its product, or any individual in Britain or any company in Britain can produce any product of very high quality, but cannot realize the maximum potential if there are trade restrictions or if there are economic restrictions. So the system of Britain should give him the chance to develop maximum, to know its skill maximum, and later on, after knowing its skill to maximum potential, to sell it throughout the world in a free market system. So that was the kind of approach Adam Smith advocated, that the nation should not be interfering in an individual entrepreneurship. Adam Smith stated, while there were anti-mercantilist economic writers during this period, few still advocated complete free trade or set out systematic reasons for believing that free trade might be desirable. Because if we go by the purely nationalistic ideas, I do not say that nationalistic ideas are not of significance. But if we make the nationalistic ideas as a ground of interference in individual development of entrepreneur skill, then definitely that person or that individual skill will remain subdued, and that is something is not liked by an economist of the stature of Adam Smith. Earlier mercantilists, they were believing in the nationalistic ideas that if something goes contrary to the economic interest of the nation, then that should not be allowed. But if you go by the free market approach, or if you go by the free trade approach on a global basis, then you will not think on whether that something is pro-nationalistic or anti-nationalistic, but you will allow it. For example, the US-China relationship, they are not very sweet, but US has allowed, or why US? Even India has allowed the goods from China, because everything cannot be weighted or it cannot be scaled in terms of the nationalistic ideas. The big breakthrough came with Adam Smith's An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. With this book, Smith fundamentally changed economic thinking about international trade. So, international trade simply is not confined to the thoughts of earning profit and loss by a nation, but such an environment being created where every individual having its economic potential can explore its maximum through means of international trade. That is what, and finally leading to the wealth of its nation. That is what Adam Smith advocated. Smith argued that economic growth depended upon specialization and the division of labor. Now, the division of labor means, I explain it likewise. Country A can produce cars, can produce wine, can produce cloth, but it is best in manufacturing, let's say, cars and cloth, and just marginal in producing wine. Now, how the labor should be used? That means the productive force of the labor that must be focused in producing cars, in producing cores, in producing cloth. So far as the labor force that is invested in producing wine, this can be even shifted in manufacturing car and manufacturing cloth. And with regard to the wine, this can be imported. Wine can be imported. But if you see this alternatively, that means if the labors are used both in cars, in wines and cloth, that means that is not the proper distribution of the labor force, and this will be the wastage of the labor. So, firstly, to realize the potential of a system, that in which area they can do the best, and then try to focus in that area. Smith argued that economic growth depended upon specialization. So, that will lead to the economic growth. The division of labor based on specialization. Promote greater productivity, that is producing more goods from the same resources, which is essential for achieving higher standard of living. Now, how this higher standard of living can be obtained? By specializing the goods where a nation can make best. That is because the nation will produce the goods it is best in producing, and then it will export the maximum of that good, and the earning it obtains from that export will be the wealth generation, and that will help in achieving the economic standard or raising the standard of its people. Another example is like in India, we have good software professionals. We also have good, in some respect, healthcare system, not in all respect, but in some respect. So, we can focus, or we can train more of the software professionals, we can train more in our people in our healthcare system, and likewise we will, by focusing in these areas, we will be helping the world at large, because they will get the quality product at a cheaper price in both the areas, and our people will be benefited by gaining in economic terms also. So, that definitely will benefit both the sides. But take alternatively, if we do not focus in the areas where we are best, then we have wasted the resources. Neither the other side or other countries are benefited, neither the economic standard or the living standard of our people have gained. So that is how we compare nowadays. Smith gives details not just on benefits of free trade but also on the cost of government intervention. Adam Smith also stated that unnecessary government intervention every time is not very fair. Now, what basically is government intervention? Basically, we understand it is the political intervention, but political intervention is through the policy measure. Now, that is also not liked by Adam Smith. Why? Because that does not allow free competition. Free competition means that there is no government intervention. We allow the entrepreneurs to decide their values, their product quality according to the market competition, because consumers are the best to judge. Secondly, the government intervention is through the means of subsidies. Like if the goods that are, I explain it, the concept of subsidy. If the cost of producing goods, a good, any particular good is $10, and after producing it is sold at $12. Now there is a government support, and government support reduces cost of production to $8 and sold at $10. Now you can see there is by $2 subsidy, what is the effect? But the question arises, from where does this $2 subsidy came? That is basically the taxpayers' money. Now this taxpayers' money that is used here as subsidy to reduce the cost of production finally is the wastage of taxpayers' money, and the same can be used for somewhere else, or maybe in developing any infrastructure, or government can use it in some better purposes. So the government intervention has to be very objective. There should not be readily government intervention or support from the government side always, but in some respect the government intervention is required, like in the cases of floods, in the cases where we are targeting to switch over to renewable sources of energy, we are targeting to sustainable mode of energy. So there a lot of the cost is generated, or we have to bear a lot of economic burden which cannot be simply shared by the private sector. So there the government intervention can be justified. We will discuss this broadly when we are discussing the chapter on subsidies. So Adam Smith argued that great object of mercantilism was to diminish as much as possible the importation of foreign goods for home consumption and to increase as much as possible the exportation of the produce of domestic industry. Adam Smith compared what the early mercantilists thought. They always advocated like a shopkeeper. Mercantilist means they were like a shopkeeper, that we will do business only when we gain from that trade. So a country should export more, do more of export and take less of the import, or country should get involved in international trade only if they have higher export in comparison to the imports. These goals were to be achieved through import restrictions. So for this, what they do, the early mercantilists, they were protectionist. They do not allow the imports in their home country. So that was leading to a different kind of world order, and that has led to the colonialist mentality, that has led to the wars between the nations. Smith made a powerful case that government promotion of trade and government restriction of trade were unwise and harmful, but that, as stated to you, that does not allow an individual skills to develop. It is all controlled by the government. You cannot be a good service provider, you cannot be a good doctor, because finally it is the government which will dictate you what you have to do. He fundamentally changed the analysis of trade policy and essentially established the presumption that free trade was the best policy unless some other consideration overrode that presumption. So he was one of the pioneers to advocate free trade. Now, why I have correlated this here, the ideas of Adam Smith, because Adam Smith ideas of free trade, later being further improved by David Ricardo and some other economists, they were adopted by the GATT and the WTO. So when we talk, we all know that GATT promoted the idea of free trade, WTO is promoting the idea of free trade, but who were the real propounder of this concept, and what led them to bring this idea before us, or what were the reasoning with them that led to the generation of these ideas? So that background starts with the Adam Smith reasoning on free trade. Now this led to the WTO, basically the institutions that is leading the international trade order. When did the WTO came into existence? The World Trade Organization, as it is known, is a big transformation of the GATT, as I have stated to you. It started in the year 1995. So after the GATT came into existence, it continued, and later on there were several conferences, Uruguay round of conferences, and finally that led to the idea the new organization has to be started, and finally during those conferences it was decided World Trade Organization will be established, and it came into function on 1995. The World Trade Organization came into being in the year 1995, one of the youngest of the international organization. The WTO is the successor of the GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, established in the wake of Second World War. Presently it has 164 members since 29 July 2016. What is the preamble of the WTO? So since it is a treaty based organization, it has its own preamble. Now firstly I must state, and this is the first paragraph of the preamble that I will discuss with you, why we need preamble of an organization. Because preamble of the organization sets the objectives for which this is created. Secondly, it creates its own individual identity. That means WTO as an organization has its own individual identity distinct from the other organizations. The decisions given by the WTO are binding on the member states, because there can be a question based on international law that member states, they have collectively organized and recognized this as an institution, and they have set the objectives of this organization and institutions. Then whether it is a supranational body, or it is a body that is subdued, or it is subjugated, or it has a status lower than that of the member states. So in order to give its scope in international law, in order to define its eligibility in international law, when it comes to binding its obligation, when it's come to fulfilling its obligation or stating its role before the member states who have constituted it, it must have its own individual identity distinct from its member state. So the preamble of this organization creates separate identity, separate institutional status that distincts it from other institutions and also from the member state that has constituted it. That means if country A, who is the member of the WTO, is not willing to fulfill the treaty based obligations, then WTO can take actions, any remedial measures, and that member state will not challenge that. Since it's a sovereign nation, now it's up to the nation whether it accept those obligations or not. So that is the main legal consequences of this independent institutions. Preamble of the WTO, recognizing that their relation in the field of trade and economic endeavor should be conducted to raise standards of living, ensure full employment, and a large and steadily growing volume of real income, and effective demand and expand the production of and trade in goods and services. The first paragraph of the preamble that I have stated here, that is basically an eye-opening thing, which clarifies that trade among the nations or trade between the nations should not be considered as it used to be earlier. Rather, this institution has its own objective, and the regulation of trade through this institution is basically to fulfill that objective. It is not to fulfill the capitalist motive. So what are those objectives? That their relation in the field of trade and economic endeavor should be conducted to raise standards of living. So as stated to you earlier, that during Second World War and during the colonial period and afterwards, there are many people who could not achieve the basic standard of living or quality life. Now that quality of life or standard of living has to be achieved by means of opening the barriers of trade, by opening other form of markets that can allow the service providers to give services in other countries, by giving the different role to developing and less developed nations accordingly. Because when we talk about raising the standard of living, ensuring full employment and large and steadily growing volume of real income, that is not only confined to a particular group of country, but that covers the people of developed, developing and less developed countries, and that has to be achieved and through the free trade measures that are being adopted by the WTO. The term here used is growing volume of real income. Now what is the real income? Real income is not simply increase in the salary. Real income is increasing the purchasing power. For example, if someone has a salary of 10,000 Indian rupees and the cost of car is, let's say today the cost of car is 1 lakh rupees. Okay, car's cost. Now if this person's salary is increased to 1 lakh rupees after 5 years, and the cost of car is increased to 10 lakh rupees, unit 10, 100,000, 10,000 lakh, 10 lakh, cost of car after 5 years, then there is no increase in real income, because he will not be able to purchase the car as he was not able to purchase earlier. So there is an increase in his wages, increase in his salary, but no net increase in real income. Real income means increase in purchasing power capacity. Increasing purchasing power. How is that possible? Take the same example, 10,000 rupees salary, cost of car 1 lakh rupees, salary increase 1 lakh rupees, cost of car same. Then we can say there is real increase in the real income. So that is something where the WTO targets, we have to increase the real income of the people, large and steadily growing volume of real income and effective demand, and expand the production of and trade in goods and services. Moreover, the economies of the nation should be brought in such order, the market structure of the nation, the financial structure of the nation should be brought in such order that they are ready to expand their production level, increase their trade in goods, and provide more services. So it is not simply the treaty objectives of the WTO, but there has to be a reform in market structure, financial structure, and other systemic things that are interrelated with the objectives of the WTO. While allowing for optimal use of the world's resources in accordance with the objective of sustainable development, seeking both to protect and preserve the environment and to enhance the means for doing so in a manner consistent with their respective need and concern and different level of economic development. Thank you for giving time. We'll continue further in our next lecture series.